Thank you. Good morning. I'm a little more awake now than last service. I told those folks, I said, before my first cup of coffee, I'm an atheist. So I had a hard start last service. Now it's all in my bloodstream, and I'm ready to rock and roll here. I'm the father of two kind of little girls, 11 years old and 8 years old. And they just had birthdays a couple of months ago, so I kind of do the math, keep track of that thing. I just have a birthday coming up in about 6 weeks, too. I mean, having two little girls, that's not a big deal. That's not unusual, except for the birthday that I got coming up next week, a couple of weeks. And I can't tell you the number, but let's just say it's my first anniversary of my Medicare birthday. God, that's really painful to say that, all right? Which means with two little girls, I need prayer, all right? So my 8-year-old, who, when she was 4, she was already testing my mettle as an apologist. She said, "Papa, can God do anything?" I said, "Yeah, God can do anything." She said, "Really? Can God poop?" I said, "Well, you got me there. Even though I've got two little girls, keep me young." I don't know, who made that up? Kids keep you young. Who made? That's a lie. Because I'm not getting any younger. I'm getting older. Years ago, my perspective was very different on things. When I was 20 years old, the years kind of stretched out forever. Can't see the end. You don't think it's ever going to end. And then you reach a point in your life when there are more, let's say, sands in the bottom of the hourglass than there are in the top, right? And they seem to be flowing a lot faster. My father-in-law died at 96. He was born 6 weeks before the Titanic sank. And I asked him, "Dad, what was it? What's it like? All that time? How would you describe your life?" And he used 2 words. He says, "Greased lightning." And it was over with. Goes fast. And as you get a little older, it changes how you view things. When I was in college in the 70s, there was a song, a couple of songwriters I really like, Simon and Garfunkel. Some of you might know who these guys are, but they had a song that described 2 old men, old friends, waiting in the twilight of their lives for the last of those sands to trickle out. And if you can kind of put up with this for just a moment, there are a couple of lines in the song go like this. "Old friends sat on the park bench like bookends, lost in their overcoats waiting for the sunset." 2 old guys waiting for life to end. And then there's a line that my buddy and I used to reflect on because it seems so odd. The line was, "Can you imagine us years from today, sharing a park bench quietly? How terribly strange to be 70. I'm just 4 years away from 70. All those years have been eaten up, and here I am in the other end of things. We couldn't even imagine such a thing." The final line of the song goes, "Memory brushes the same years, silently sharing the same fear. Old friends, old friends." What was that fear? That these old men sitting on a park bench like bookends are silently sharing. It's that fear of the end of everything. And an end that was drawing quickly near. And I know some of you are thinking, you younger folk, nah, that's a long way off. I don't have to think about that for a long time. Is it really a long way off? Nobody knows what's going to happen the next moment. James says, don't boast about what you're going to do tomorrow. You have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. Your life is like a breath. It flashes by like this, and even if you live a long time, it's still greased lightning. And years ago, I saw a film series that really captivated me. It was a great series. At the time, it was the most popular film series like that had ever been done. But it got me thinking about death and about what follows after death. This film series is called Lonesome Dove. It's a Western. Probably the greatest Western ever done. Partly because of the acting. The story is fabulous. McMurtry writes the story, got a Pulitzer Prize for it. Larry McMurtry. And it's not exactly a family film in some ways because there's a cavalier attitude about sex and prostitution. There's some violence in there, so you got little kids. Maybe it's not for you. But they also has a beautiful vistas and a haunting musical score and great attention to detail and authenticity and a great cast. Robert Duvall, Tommy Lee Jones, Robert Ulrich, Danny Glover, Angelica Houston. And what you're doing is you're following the story of two aging Texas Ranger legends who are kind of at the twilight of their years, these old friends, as it were. And they're living out their last days, and they're trying to figure out what to do with their last days because they've done their thing, and it's so they get an idea, and they live down in the very, very, very southern tip of Texas, right on the Rio Grande, in a little bitty town called Lonesome Dove, and they decide to get a bunch of cattle and drive them all the way to Montana. And so this is what the story's about. And these close friends, Augustus McRae, Gus, played by Robert Duvall, and Woodrow Call, or simply called the Captain Call, was played by Tommy Lee Jones. And I just got to tell you that the casting is pitch perfect. Because Gus is kind of a easygoing guy, kind of philosopher type, takes life as it comes and goes. And Tommy Lee Jones is just the opposite. He's quiet, he's brooding. And so they have almost a kind of antagonistic friendship. But as a viewer, I developed a real attachment to the Gus character especially. The Tommy Lee Jones character. I'm sorry, the Robert Duvall character, Gus. And that's why I was a little bit surprised when about 2/3 of the way through the story, and if you haven't seen it, there's a little spoiler alert here, Gus dies. Now, his body stays around for a while, and all the way to the end, as it turns out, and this is kind of an odd thing about the story. But in his parting words, he says to his buddy, Captain Call, he says, Call, we've had a hell of a ride, haven't we? And it got me thinking about our topic today, which is hell, death, hell. And as I watched this film, and I'm not sure how much of this was consciously done by McMurtry in his writing of this, but there were three things that struck me about death watching the film. The first thing that struck me about death, because there's a lot of dying in this 6 hours or whatever, as people are kind of living on the frontier. The first thing that struck me is its suddenness. The second thing that struck me is its finality. Once you die, it's it. And the third thing that struck me is a strange kind of surprise that I think many are going to face at death. Or I should say just after death. Let me take them one by one and flesh this out a little bit for you. First, death comes suddenly. It surprises us. And as I watched the movie, my first impulse was to think this was bad writing because characters would be introduced into a story. And you'd kind of get a little bit of their background and their motivation. You understand how they fit in with the plot line. And you could even begin to imagine how these plot lines of the different characters are going to intersect down the line, and you're anticipating this kind of thing, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they get whacked. They're dead. And I'm thinking, that's kind of a main character. How do you kill a main character in the beginning of the movie? But this is it. And I thought, what's he doing? McMurtry, the writer. And then I realized, he's telling us how life is. When death happens, It happens oftentimes with no warning and no resolution of the issues. That is, death is sudden, it is intrusive, it is uninvited, and it's final. And the unfinished business will remain forever unfinished. You think about that. Death has no respect for the details of plot development or for the flow of the script or for conflict resolution. It just assaults life. Has a timing all of its own, and it doesn't wait, and it doesn't take our counsel, it doesn't ask our permission, and it often doesn't even warn us. You know, sometimes you get signs of a heart attack. You ever study that kind of thing? Most of you young people don't care about that. A few years, you'll start thinking about it. What are the signs of a heart attack? Well, you know, here's the most common sign of a heart attack. So if this happens, you probably have a heart attack. You're having one. 80% of the times, the first sign of a heart attack is instant death. That's a pretty good indicator. Boom! And it happens like that. And it happened a week and a half ago to one of my staff members' fathers. He just went over just like that, out of nowhere. Bam, he's down, and they never revived him. I had a friend about 4 years ago, also a radio broadcaster in Los Angeles, and he was a guy I went to college with, I went to grad school with. Frank Pastore was the host of the most popular Christian drive time radio show, live radio show in the country. And on a Monday afternoon when he's doing his 3 to 6 show, he's talking about the existence of the soul to his people. He's got a master's degree in philosophy. He knows how to traffic in this stuff. And he's talking about the existence of the soul. And he's saying, you know what? If I go home tonight and I ride my motorcycle and I get clipped by a car and I get spread all over the freeway, I won't be there. My body parts will be there, but I will be with the Lord. And that evening, driving down the freeway, the 118, after the show, on his motorcycle, he got clipped by a car and he went down. And he was in a coma for 4 weeks, and then he died. Just like that. You never know when it's going to happen. And all the questions haven't been answered, and all the threads of the plot have not been neatly tied off. Life just ends. Jesus said in Luke chapter 12, he's talking about a man who had a lot of wealth. He said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns. I'll build larger ones, and there I'll store my grain and my goods. And I'll say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up and many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, be merry. And Jesus said, you fool. This very night your soul is required of you. So there's a suddenness. There's also an overwhelming sense of finality. That is, when death knocks, it's over completely. And I know there were people on that Friday night, or that Monday night, when they heard of the accident of my buddy, Frank Pastore. They were thinking, he couldn't have had an accident. He couldn't be in a coma now. He couldn't be down. I was just listening to him an hour ago. I just was texting the guy. He's not dead. I was just on the phone with them, kind of thing. No, there's kind of a finality. It's hard to sink in, but when they're gone, and that's it. C.S. Lewis got married late in life. For a very short time, as it turned out, to Joy Davidman. And then she died. And he wrote about his grief in a book called A Grief Observed, which is actually not a book, it's just a little diary of his feelings, emotions, reflections, anguishes. It's very small, you can get it easily. And as he's reflecting on the suddenness and finality of death, he says, I look up at the sky, and is there anything more certain than that in all of those vast times and spaces, if I were allowed to search them, I should nowhere find her face, her voice, her touch. She died. She is dead, is the word so difficult to learn. But the finality of death raises another question, and the question is, once death, what lies behind? And this was Shakespeare's question in his famous soliloquy put on the lips of Hamlet, which goes like this. Think of the words. To be or not to be, that's the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep, no more. And by sleep we say we and the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we've shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. And so Hamlet is conjecturing that, in a sense, to die would put an end to the suffering and the hardship and the difficulty and put it behind us, and we would have rest and we would have sleep. But, wait a minute. What dreams may come when we shuffle off this mortal coil? What's next? I was in a debate a number of years ago on doctor-assisted suicide, which I'm against. And the other side argued something like this: why would you want to prevent people from putting themselves out of their misery? And part of my point was, you're making an assumption when you say that, and you're making the assumption that death puts people out of their misery. But back to Hamlet, what dreams may come when they shuffle off that mortal coil? What happens afterwards? On both sides of this divide, this particular debate, you have worldview assumptions that are being made. Maybe they don't just disappear and are put out of their misery. Maybe they are put in greater misery because of what happens. And Hamlet concludes it's that dread of something after death, that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. That's what puzzles the will. So death comes suddenly and with finality. But the third thing that struck me watching A Lonesome Dove was that those people caught suddenly by death would also be surprised, in many cases, by a truth they discover after death. That is, they will be surprised to find out that after death, it's not over with. They're consciously aware that there's something afterwards, and in many cases, it's not going to be a pretty picture, and their fate will be sealed forever, cast in stone. And there's nothing they can do about it. And sometimes I hear of somebody dying. And here, you know what I think? Especially a famous person who doesn't believe in God. You know what I think? Now he knows. Now he knows. He's dead. Now he knows. And it turns out that, back to the film here, Lonesome Dove, it doesn't matter how much I liked Gus as a character. You get attached to him. It's fiction, but you know what I'm talking about. It didn't matter how much I liked him. Gus was living a profligate life. He was giving no thought for God at all. He was living as if he were the master of his own soul. And Gus was going to hell. He'd be caught by surprise, but it would be too late. And I think that's the way it's going to be for a lot of people. 4 years ago, I went to Italy and I did some work there, and my 11-year-old was 7 at the time. I brought her with me. She's on the precocious side, but I think it was a little bit early for a trip like that. Partly she thought she was going to eat a lot of pizza, which we did eat some pizza, but I'm just telling you, pizza in Italy doesn't taste like pizza down the street. They use mozzarella cheese that's really strong, and it just tastes different. And if you have kids, you know kids don't like things that taste different. And so it kind of put her off her feet a little bit. But I had an opportunity to go to Rome on a day, and we went to the Sistine Chapel. And there on one end of the Sistine Chapel is a magnificent characterization of the Last Judgment, Michelangelo's masterpiece. The whole thing is a masterpiece, but the Last Judgment. And this has all been restored, so it's all cleaned up, so everything is really powerful and vivid. And when you look at the scenes, you can see captured in the painting and the artistic capability of Michelangelo, the sense of surprise in the eyes of the people who are there faced with judgment, forced into the boat to cross the river Styx into hell. Now, part of the reason people are going to be caught by surprise by the truth is that they have false views about hell. So let me cover a couple of them. Here's a secular view of hell. There is none. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to give this talk tomorrow at Marshall. Never given this before, an audience like that before. It's going to be interesting for me. Probably most people in that audience are going to have that view. There is no hell. Hell has become outdated. It's archaic. It's antiquated. It's old-fashioned. Now, I don't know. I never quite understood this idea. Well, that's old-fashioned. If something's true, like 1,000 years ago, it seems to me it's still true today, even if it's not in fashion. And if it's false 1,000 years ago, it's false today, even if it's really popular. I don't see what fashion has to do with it. Just because people don't like the idea of hell doesn't mean that there's no hell. All right? But I think that to some degree, this rejection of hell is driven by a certain assumption about the nature of the world. And the assumption is, and it is an assumption, that the world consists of only material things that can be measured by science. This is called materialism or naturalism or physicalism. There are different terms for it. But a large number of people actually believe this, especially the educated crowd. They make this particular assumption. And so when it comes to something like the soul that leaves the body when you die and then goes somewhere, nice or not nice, depending, the story goes, you got to have a soul to do that. But a soul is not something you can measure by science, and if you can't measure it by science, the view is it does not exist. And so I'm reading an article in Time magazine a number of years ago, and it's talking about the issue of consciousness. Now, consciousness is one's awareness of one's self. Consciousness is the activity of the soul. When you introspect, you're reflecting on your consciousness and on your soul. But this Time magazine article was all about consciousness, and they're trying to figure out what consciousness is. Now, of course, what they're trying to do is reduce consciousness to something physical. I'm just going to tell you something. This article was written in 1975. There's been another article since then, and not a lot of work done since then, and you just can't reduce consciousness to something physical. And even atheists are admitting this. You can get a book now by Thomas Nagel, Nagel, philosophical atheist from New York University. And it's called Mind and Cosmos. It's a little book. But he's just saying, it's obvious that consciousness cannot be reduced to something physical. Okay, it's not molecules. And anyway, they're examining this issue. They don't want to go there in the article. They're trying to reduce it. They can't do it. At the end of the article, here's what they say. They say, you know what, we don't know what consciousness is. But we know what it isn't. Here's what it isn't. There is no kernel of self inside of your body that's running the show. There is no soul. Now, how do they know this? Well, they tell you in the article. They give two reasons. Here's the first reason, and on my honor, I am not making this up. Let me see if I have the footnote. Is Time Magazine 1975, I think it's July 17. You can look it up. On my honor, here's what it said. Scientists have been looking for the soul for 100 years and haven't been able to find it. That's the first reason. Here's the second reason. There is no conceivable space in the brain for the soul to fit. That is an exact quote. Time Magazine. Well, that's like saying, you know, you told me there was an invisible man in your house. I went in there and I didn't see him anywhere. I looked under the bed and I looked in the closet and I looked out in the shed. I didn't see him. Well, look, that doesn't prove an invisible man exists. Please understand me. But that's the wrong way to show he doesn't exist. And by the same token, if there is a soul, it is not physical. Scientists are not going to find it with a Geiger counter. Use different means of determining whether souls exist than a scientific analysis. And if it's not physical, it doesn't need a space to fit in. But there is a convenience, though, to rejecting the notion of the soul. If you assume physicalism, then there's no soul. And if there's no soul, then there is nothing to survive the death of the body. Then there's no life after death. And then there can't be any hell, which seems convenient. There's a payoff for believing that. So denying hell may bring comfort to those who deserve to be punished for their misdeeds. May silence for the moment the cries of your own conscience, but it isn't going to make hell go away if it's really there. Now here's another one that doesn't add up to me. I know, and I've heard this from people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. I'm not speaking disparagingly of this well-known atheist. I'm just saying this is what they say. Hell is a scare tactic. Hell is you're trying to scare me. Yes, I am trying to scare you. It is right to be frightened of something really dangerous. I'm trying to scare the hell out of you. There's no problem with scaring people when the truth is they're in terrible danger. So those are some secular responses regarding hell. You also have some religious views about hell. And one of those views is that a loving God would never send anyone to hell. Now, this is becoming increasingly popular even in Christian circles. And some of you might be familiar with a gentleman named Rob Bell. He wrote a book, Love Wins, about 6 or 7 years ago, created quite a stir. I went to Amazon and I saw the little video that he made that promoted the book, and I just wrote it all down, and I'm just going to tell you what he said. He's a very powerful communicator, and he's from Minnesota, or from Grand Rapids. He was standing out in an alley somewhere with the light on him, making this video, just talking to the camera, does it all in one take. It's pretty powerful. Here's what he said. He said, several years ago, we had an art show at our church. People brought in all kinds of sculptures and paintings, and we put them on display, and there was this one piece that had a quote from Gandhi in it, and lots of people found the piece compelling. They'd stop and sort of stare at it and take it in and reflect on it, but not everybody found it that compelling. Somewhere in the course of the art show, somebody attached a handwritten note to the piece, and on the note they had written, reality check, Gandhi is in hell. And then Rob Bell pauses for a moment for effect, and he says, Gandhi's in hell? And someone knows this for sure? And felt the need to let the rest of us know? Incidentally, just so you know, as I'm reading this, this is a Christian pastor of one of the largest churches at the time in Grand Rapids. Will only a few select people make it to heaven, and will billions and billions of people burn forever in hell? And if that's the case, How do you become one of the few? If that's what you believe, or what is it what you believe, or what you say, or what you do, or who you know, or something that happens in your heart, or do you need to be initiated or baptized, or you need to take a class, or converted, or be born again? How does one become one of these few? Now, let me pause for a second. This is a Christian pastor who is asking these questions, not rhetorically. He's asking them as if he doesn't know, as if the standard Christian answer is somehow bizarre or unusual or out of line. Someone you know? Well, yeah, I guess it is someone you know, after a fashion. His name is Jesus. And he continues, then there's the question behind the question, the real question, what is God like? Because millions and millions of people were taught that the primary message, the center of the gospel of Jesus, is that God is going to send you to hell unless you believe in Jesus. And so what gets subtly sort of caught and taught is that Jesus rescues you from God. But what kind of God is that? That we would need to be rescued from this God. How could that God ever be good? How could that God ever be trusted? How could that ever be good news? This is why he finishes, why lots of people want nothing to do with Christian faith. They see it as an endless list of absurdities and inconsistencies, and they say, why would I ever want to be part of that? See, what we believe about heaven and hell is incredibly important because it exposes what we believe about who God is and what God is like. And then he closes off and makes a pitch for the book. Rob Bell, by the way, at this time, Time magazine had listed him as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And this is a Christian speaking to the world. And this is what he has to say. So let me answer his question. What subtly gets sort of caught and taught is that Jesus rescues you from God. Let me tell you what Jesus does on the cross. He rescues us for sure. But what does he rescue us from? He rescues us from the Father. I hope the message isn't that we are just subtly communicating that Jesus rescues us from God. I hope the message is explicit. Because that is the fact of the matter. Because it is the Father who is angry. And what Jesus does on the cross is he satisfies the wrath of God. And that is called propitiation. 1 John chapter 2. My little children, I write these things to you so you do not sin. But if you do sin, you have an advocate with the Father in Jesus Christ. And he himself is the propitiation. That is the satisfaction. That is, God is not angry at us anymore because what? Of Jesus did on our behalf. Jesus was the one who said, don't fear him who can kill the body, but not the soul. Fear rather him who can throw both body and soul in hell. And he's not talking about the devil there, he's talking about the Father. Fear him. That's in Matthew chapter 10. Ought we fear God? Yes. Why? Because we're in trouble. Because we are guilty. But there is a rescue plan. And Jesus stands in the way of the wrath of God, and that is good news. Whether Rob Bell likes it or not. A loving God would never send anyone to hell? Really? So what love requires is that people who do evil get off scot-free. Is that what love requires? You know, people complain about all the evil in the world. Why didn't God do something about the evil in the world? I said, okay, God's going to do something. He's going to punish people who do evil. Oh, I can't do that. He's a loving God. Whatever gave anybody the idea that God was a loving God? Well, isn't that in the Bible? Yeah. It's in the Bible. God is love. There's 1 John chapter 4. So God is love. But you know, the same Bible that says God is love says that God is going to punish those who do wrong. Because God is love. Do you realize that love is a moral virtue? It flows from God's goodness. And because God is good, he cannot let evil reign and go unpunished. It's part of the package. It's the thing that makes God loving is the same thing that requires justice. It's all tied together in the character of God. If justice demands retribution, it would be unjust to allow evil to go unpunished and to reward evil with good. No, there's no inconsistency between love and justice, especially when mercy is offered and it's rejected. God's mercy flows from his love. His justice flows from his goodness, which his love flows from. It's all connected. So yes, we're guilty, but he's going to offer, out of love, an opportunity for pardon. Now look at it. If you say no to that, well, all right, well then you stand on your own with your own crimes such as they are. If you say no to that, but God's offering mercy. Now some Christians think, well, there is no hell. We're just going to get wiped out. We're going to get annihilated. This is becoming more and more popular. So let me give you the number one reason that I believe in hell. It's because someone who died and came back to life again confirmed it. And I don't mean one of those people who were gone for a few minutes or a few hours and then came back and then wrote a book about it, became a bestseller at Walmart. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean someone who is brutally beaten, viciously murdered, then embalmed with over 100 pounds of chemicals and sealed in a crypt. I'm not talking about a near-death experience. I'm talking about a stone-cold dead guy who then, not 3 minutes later or 3 hours later, but 3 days later, when most corpses would be rotting and stinking, this guy got up and he walked out of that crypt. You think a guy like that would have any credibility? You think we should listen to what he has to say about this kind of thing? I think so. I'm talking about Jesus of Nazareth. And listen to what he had to say about this issue. Matthew 25. He said, in the final days, the end of the story, we're going to have a dividing of the sheep and the goats. And he'll say to the sheep, come, you are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. But to the goats, he's going to say, depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal fire, which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. Now, where's he sending them? That's where he says, I never knew you. You who work iniquity. There's going to be a lot of people who think they're Christians. They're going to be on the wrong side of this divide. Depart from me. Into the eternal fire. Now, what fire is he talking about? Well, if you go to the end of the story, Revelation chapter 20, in verse 10, John tells us there in a vision that he's seen what's going on in this final analysis, in this final judgment, when the problem of evil is solved, when justice is finally done. He says the devil was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also, and they will be annihilated? No, tormented day and night forever and ever. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. That's the fire that Jesus is talking about. And if you just look at the contrast here, you've got Jesus welcoming the sheep in to enjoy life and friendship with him forever, which means without end. And parallel to that are those who are thrown into the lake of fire for how long? Forever. Which is the same place that the devil is going to be thrown in, and they will be in the lake of fire forever. That's what it says. In other words, everyone lives forever. Some in eternal life, others in eternal death. Not everybody lives happily ever after. Now, some folks think, well, I can buy my way out of that. Okay? I'm not so bad. I talked to an atheist 2 nights ago. And he expressed to me, this was at the university, he said, I don't get it. I don't understand the Jesus thing. Now, he knew it conceptually because I asked him to I said, you don't know why people believe in Jesus and how he works out? Oh, yeah, he forgives your sins and that kind of stuff. But it doesn't make any sense to me. Because his perspective was that he was a basically good person. And he's trying to do things to help out humanity. So why would God throw him in hell? And so there's this conception here like, well, okay, nobody's perfect. But I'm no Hitler. To which I say, good. One was enough. And so they think, since they're not that bad, and they're pretty good, that whatever good things they do kind of weigh against the bad things, and so in the balance, they're more good than bad. And what I tried to explain to the gentleman, Brian, the atheist, the other night, why this doesn't work is this isn't how law works. It isn't like in the legal system, if you keep the law more times than you break the law, you're going to be okay. When I was dating my wife, she lived about an hour away. And so I'd go out and I'd be with her in the evening, and then I'd take a long drive back, and sometimes it was late at night. And then late at night, there are occasionally times where there's not much traffic on the freeway in Los Angeles. And so you can kind of lean on it a little bit and try to get home quicker. And sure enough, get the rollers behind me. Police officer pulls me over. He says, do you realize you're doing 85 and a 65? I said, officer, that's not possible because I had my speed control set to 80. Which was not very convincing. So he wrote me a ticket because he had me dead to rights. But I'll tell you what else would not have worked. It wouldn't have worked if I said, you're right, 85, you're right about that. However, before I got on the freeway, there were like 6 stop signs that I stopped at, like full and complete, no rolling tires, no California rolling stop kind of thing. And I did really good at every one of those, So therefore, you ought to give me some credit against this speeding thing. Well, you know that this doesn't work, right? It isn't like you get a letter from the local in the government, and they say, district attorney, and they say, you know what, you've been doing pretty well. Haven't seen any crimes on your record. Go out and knock off a few gas stations on us. You got credit in your account. That is not the way law works. We are obliged to keep the law. That's even before God. God says this is the way you ought to live. And when you do everything you're supposed to do, then you're just keeping the law. It isn't balance out one against the other. This is why James says, you break one part of the law but not the other, you're still a lawbreaker. You're still guilty. So you commit murder but not adultery, you're going to jail. Kind of, the way James was talking about. You're guilty. And this is it. When we go before God, we don't go with just little picadillos, a little naughty thing here, a little white lie there. We bring a whole host of things. And it says there in that Revelations 20, it says the books are open. It's a rap sheet. It's a list of everything that we've done. Jesus said, every idle word a person speaks, he will give an account of in the day of judgment. It's all written down so that when we stand before God and he opens that book, there it is. We're not going to be able to say, yeah, well, I was good the rest of the time. It's not going to wash. The rest of the terrible truth about hell is in the details. Hell is a place where justice and retribution are perfect. We don't miss anything. God doesn't miss anything, rather. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Jesus said that in the Sermon on the Mount. When are they going to be satisfied? Right here, right at the end. Righteousness is done when the unrighteous are punished. And who will be that final judge? Jesus will be that final judge. Jesus says that the Father gave authority to me to execute judgment because I am the Son of Man. John 5:27. Acts chapter 10:42. This is Peter. Jesus ordered us to preach to the people and solemnly to testify that this is the one who has been appointed by God as judge of the living and the dead. Paul on Mars Hill in Acts 17, therefore, having overlooked the times of ignorance, God is now declaring that all men everywhere should repent because he has fixed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness through a man whom he has appointed, having furnished proof by raising him from the dead. So we are going to stand before Jesus. The world is. That's a reality. Retribution will be done. Hell, then, is a place of torment and agony. Two things I'll just say about it. Torment and agony, that is banishment from God. There is no picture, no description of what happens later that is given by anyone in the New Testament that is in the least having to do with judgment, that is in the least wise attractive. When Jesus is talking about the rich man and Lazarus, he's talking about the rich man who says, I am in such torment in this place. Have Lazarus dip his finger in the water so he can put his finger to my lips. Jesus describes it as a place of wailing and gnashing of teeth, outer darkness where the worm does not die and the fire does not go out. Now, does that mean there's real fire in there? I don't know. I actually don't know. Fire's got light. It says outer darkness. There are a number of different ways of talking in the New Testament to describe this place. But if there's no literal fire, the metaphor of fire is meant to communicate a literal truth. So if these are metaphors, that this place is a place like fire and brimstone and torment and the worm doesn't die and utter darkness and you'll be in such agony, you'll be wailing and gnashing of teeth. I think you get the picture. You don't want to go there. So I'm not giving the short shrift because I say I don't think there's any fire in it. This is a nasty place. And it's a place of isolation from God forever. Paul writes in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, he says that it's only right for God to bring judgment on those who persecute you. And let's see how he puts it. The banishment. These will pay the penalty of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power. Jesus says, Matthew 25, depart from me. That's where they go, away. People say, I don't want God. God says, all right, go. Here's the difficulty. If we were made to be in friendship with God and have our deepest fulfillment in a friendship with him, and we are now banished forever from his presence, then we will be ruined. That's what eternal destruction means. We are ruined. And that will be absolute misery. So let me close with this thought. Because this is a place of banishment and punishment that never ends, from which there is no escape ever. And the thought I want you to consider is that there are millions and millions of people who will find themselves by surprise crossing the river Styx, as it were, like in Michelangelo's fresco in the Sistine Chapel, with a certain knowledge that they will be banished to a world of darkness and agony and desperate aloneness that follows moment upon moment without end. And there is no escape and there is no way out and there will be no hope for them forever. Gus said, Call, we've had a hell of a ride, haven't we? And Gus has no idea of the hell that he is actually in for. Hell will catch many by surprise. Don't let it be you. Father, thank you for the time we've had today. Hard words, difficult topic, sober truth. These words can't make any difference at all in anybody's life unless your Holy Spirit does a work and buries this truth like a coal in people's heart. I pray that you would do that and transform people for the sake of your kingdom as a result.